Hello crafty friends, I hope this video finds you well. Today I'm going to create a few cards for you using a selection of marker pens. At the time of recording this video, it was not long after I'd fallen over and really hurt one of my arms and one of my legs. So I was in the need for some craft therapy, but something gentle that wasn't going to tax my joints too much. So I thought I would pull out some marker pens and just play and see where it took me. For this first card, I'm using Zig dot markers, and I'm just running some lines of colour across a piece of mixed media paper. I chose mixed media paper because it's a robust paper and can handle lots of water, because next I squirt my finished panel with lots of water and set it aside to let the colours run and mix and mingle and eventually dry. For background number 2, I used zebra mild liners in warm colours. I've got a red, an orange and a yellow, and I drew some stripes across my piece of mixed media paper, alternating the colours, and again I squirted it with lots of water, let the colours run into each other and set it aside to dry. For my third and final background, I pulled out some Arteza brush markers. These belong to my daughter and she kindly let me use them. I'm not a big fan, the colours are very bright and I don't like the bristles, but I thought I'd play with them anyway. And I drew some blue circles and then added a purple blob inside the blue circles and squirted that with water. And I really squirted this one with the water. I wanted to get the colours to move and spread and mingle as much as possible. So here are the 3 backgrounds. They're still wet and they're curled because of the water. I just left them to dry overnight and they flattened out beautifully. The next day I took my backgrounds and used them one at a time to create some cards. So for the dotty paper, I die cut out some circles. I used 3 circle nesting dies. I used the smallest of the 3 to cut out from the dotty paper, then the medium one to cut out a slightly larger circle from white card, and then I used the largest circle to die cut a frame to go around the middle-sized circle. You'll see what I mean when I put it all together. So I took the middle-sized circle and the purplish pen that I'd used on the dotty paper and went around the outside to give this a purplish colour. I think this pen is called Hyacinth. And then I took the more indigo colour pen that I'd used on my dotty background and coloured the frame. So I'm using colours that are on my dotty background to create some frames for my dotty circle. These frames were really quite bright, so I squirted them with water and then lifted off some colour with a paper towel, and this toned them down nicely. After that it was time to assemble. So I die cut with the largest circle die, a circle from copy paper. And then I put the purple frame on the copy paper, making sure to line it up nicely so none of the copy paper stuck out. Then I added the middle-sized circle with the hyacinth coloured frame around the outside. But before I added the dotty piece, I die cut the word celebrate from it with the intention of inlaying a gold word into the gaps. But, and this is where disaster struck, because of my injuries to my arms, I decided to use my electronic die cutting machine rather than my Cuttlebug. And I simply, without looking or thinking, shoved the dotty paper with the celebrate die attached into my cutting sandwich and ran it through my electronic die cutting machine. But what I'd forgotten was that I'd left a circle die in my sandwich, and my circle with the celebrate on ended up on top of the circle that I'd left in there, and it die cut into my dotty circle, basically slicing it in half. But I decided not to abandon things though, because I thought, well, I'm doing a demonstration for you guys, and you always tell me how helpful it is to see YouTubers make mistakes and then rectify them. So that's what I thought I'd do. So I put glue on the back of my circle, stuck it down as planned, inlaid a gold celebrate into the hole, and then I set it aside and worked on my next background because I thought I'm just going to let this percolate for a bit and we'll figure out a way to save this later. Right, onto the stripy background now. I really loved the way this background turned out. The stripes ended up really diffuse and subtle. So I sliced this down into 2 long pieces, chopping off some of the ends that had some blotchiness that didn't kind of work with the rest. For the first piece, I stuck it down to some black cardstock, trimmed it so it had a little border, and then used tape runner to stick it to the left hand side of a card blank. And I used black card because I felt it would be a lovely contrast to the subtle soft colour of the stripes. Next I chose a foliage die, and I die cut the shape from black cardstock, but before I ran it through my die cutting machine I put it on some thin double-sided adhesive foam, so that gave it some nice dimension and it really popped against that soft background. I chose a pre-printed and pre-cut sentiment. It says always in my thoughts. And as a finishing touch on this card, I added some Morning Dew Nouveau drops. These dry clear so they'll look like water or glass droplets. So I was really happy with the way this one turned out. I thought it was quite striking, but in a gentle way. This card gave me an idea of what to do with the other piece of stripy paper, because I thought this is quite sombre, it's quite dark in places. What if I made one that was a lot lighter and a bit brighter? So I took the other piece of stripy paper and I ran it through my die cutting machine with an embossing folder. It's just got an abstract circle pattern on it. I then took some Hero Arts Unicorn White Pigment ink and brayed that over the top, and this lightened the raised areas ever so slightly to help them stand out a bit. I then mounted it on white card and cut it out so that it had a little white border all the way around. And then I used that same foliage die and die cut from some pale gold glitter cardstock. I used my glue dotter to add some high-tack glue to the back in the same position that was on the previous card, but for this card I used a Celebrate Together sentiment, and instead of Morning Dew Nouveau drops I added some gold glitter circles that I'd previously cut out with my multi-size dot die. And if you look at the 2 cards side by side, you can see how I've used the same elements, but by swapping a light colour for a dark colour or vice versa, you get a very different feel. One, you get a kind of thinking of you, maybe sympathy card, and the other one you get a celebratory card. Okay, on to our last background. This reminded me of a sky, so I thought I'd use the whole piece. I wouldn't cut it down at all other than to trim it out a bit later. And I would add some white feathers drifting downwards as if they were floating down from the sky. So I stamped these in Unicorn White Pigment ink, and then I heat embossed them with a white detail embossing powder. And that was just to ensure that I got a really good solid white. Having said that, the feather stamp that I used was quite a cheap silicone one and was a bit uneven, so it didn't stamp perfectly. But all was not lost. I just used an embossing ink pen and drew by hand the little bits that were missing, sprinkled over some of the white embossing powder again, and then heated it with my heat tool. Once the embossing powder had cooled and set, I used a stitch rectangle panel to cut down my background, and then I used tape runner to stick it down to a card blank. I did want to add an extra focal point to this, not just a sentiment, but something else to focus the eye. So I stamped the feather again on white card using embossing ink, and then I sprinkled over some gold embossing powder and die cut the feather using its coordinating die. I then popped this on a bit of craft foam and adhered it in the top right of the card. For the sentiment, I chose a pre-printed and pre-cut large hello and layered that over the gold feather. And for a finishing touch, I brought in some gold Nouveau drops and dotted these around the feather. This just added shimmer, shine, dimension and a sense of movement. And that was that card done. I really like it. I love the soft floaty feathers in the background and the contrast with the gold shimmery feather and the bold black halo. Right, back to my dotty circle card. So I just decided to stick this down onto a stitched rectangle panel in the top right, overhanging the edge a bit. I then snipped off that overhang with a pair of scissors and then used tape runner to stick the whole panel down onto my card blank. And to hide the accidental cut lines that I'd made by inadvertently double die cutting it in my electronic die cutting machine, I used some small wobbly gold foiled circles that I'd previously cut out using one of my dies, and I strategically placed these over the worst of the cut lines. So you have to look really hard to see the mistake there. You know what I say, you can always cover it up. And there you go, that's these cards finished. Thanks so much for joining me today. I do hope you've gleaned some ideas that you can use in your own paper crafts and card making. If you have gleaned anything, do let me know in the comments. Subscribe, ring the notification bell, and I'll see you back here very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.